The collision course was set decades ago, not in the halls of power in Moscow or Ottawa, but deep beneath the planet's frozen crust. For years, we were told a comforting lie, that the Arctic was different, a pristine, untouched wilderness where the old rules of geopolitics didn't apply, a sanctuary of science and cooperation insulated from the world's conflicts. This was the dream of Arctic exceptionalism, a fantasy that has been brutally, irrevocably shattered. The High North is no longer a neutral playground. It has become the designated arena for a new Cold War, a resource-rich battleground where a militarily resurgent Russia is poised to challenge a woefully unprepared Canada. This war won't be kicked off by a clear sign or message, but by the last shocking move in an invasion we never saw coming. A dream of peace shattered on the ice. You might think the Arctic has always been a powder keg, but the truth is far more recent and far more chilling. In the optimistic haze after the Cold War, the region was a beacon of hope. What you need to understand is that institutions like the Arctic Council were built on the premise that nations with competing interests could set aside their differences to tackle shared challenges like climate change and environmental protection. It was a place where Russian scientists worked alongside their Canadian and American counterparts, and military discussions were taboo. This cooperative spirit even survived Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. While Canada pushed for consequences, our allies balked, choosing to compartmentalize the conflict and keep the lines of communication open in the north. It was a fatal miscalculation. Then, with the force of an avalanche, that dream was sledgehammered into oblivion. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 wasn't just a distant conflict. It was the death knell for Arctic peace. The very foundation of the Arctic Council, respect for sovereignty, had been violated. The 7 other Arctic nations, including Canada, had no choice but to shut the door, pausing all cooperation with Moscow. Suddenly, the primary diplomatic safety valve was gone. But behind the headlines, a more sinister reality was taking shape. The map itself was redrawn. With the historic accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, the entire strategic calculus of the region flipped on its head. What was once a complex 8-player game became a stark, menacing 7-versus-1 standoff. From Moscow's perspective, this wasn't a defensive alliance expanding. It was a hostile encirclement. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov wasn't just posturing when he decried NATO's militarization of the Arctic. He was telegraphing a deep-seated paranoia that now justifies any and all aggressive moves as defensive. For NATO, the Arctic transformed overnight from a peripheral curiosity into a critical northern flank, a highway for Russian submarines aimed at the heart of the transatlantic alliance. The stage was set, the lines were drawn, and the long, frozen peace was officially over. At the heart of this brewing conflict lies a prize of almost unimaginable value. The Arctic is estimated to hold a staggering 22% of the world's undiscovered oil and gas, and a king's ransom in critical minerals like palladium, nickel, and rare earth elements. As the ice melts, this treasure is becoming easier to reach, and a ferocious high-stakes battle for control is unfolding in the shadows. Make no mistake, this isn't just a legal squabble, it's a ticking time bomb. The main Flashpoint is a massive underwater mountain range called the Lomonosov Ridge, a feature stretching about 1,120 miles across the polar basin. Based on its interpretation of geology, Russia submitted a claim under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea that brazenly extends its continental shelf right up to Canada's front door. Not to be outdone, Canada fired back with its own expanded claim, creating a vast overlapping territory of contested seabed. And this is where the strategy descends into sheer audacity. Russia is playing a double game. On one hand, it uses the scientific rules-based UNCLOS process to legitimize its land grab. However, on the other hand, it flagrantly violates the very same treaty by illegally declaring the entire Northern Sea Route, a critical international waterway, as its own internal waters, thereby forcing foreign ships to obtain permission to pass. This isn't about respecting international law. It's about a great power picking and choosing which rules to follow. For Canada, a nation whose entire claim to Arctic sovereignty is built on the foundation of that international law, This is an existential threat. The dispute over the Lomonosov Ridge is no longer a dry legal battle. It's a battle for the future of the rules-based order itself. This confrontation is mirrored in the strategic waterways that are the future highways of global trade. Russia has invested billions in transforming the northern sea route into a competitive national transportation passage, building a fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers, military bases, and port facilities to solidify its control. Canada's Northwest Passage, by contrast, is a story of vulnerability. Ottawa claims it has internal waters, but its closest ally, the United States, rejects that claim, viewing it as an international strait. This legal weakness, combined with a near-total lack of infrastructure and ice-breaking capability, leaves Canada's claim looking hollow, an open invitation for a challenge. The Bear's Fortress versus the Missing Shield. The military imbalance in the High North is not only stark but also terrifying. While Canada has been lulled into a false sense of security by geography and a peace dividend mindset, Russia has methodically built an Arctic fortress, a layered, impenetrable bastion designed for one purpose: to wage and win a war. This was the point of no return. Under the banner of its Northern Fleet Joint Strategic Command, Russia has implemented the bastion defense concept. Defensively, it creates a sanctuary for its nuclear ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, the crown jewels of its second strike capability. Offensively, it uses this fortified zone to project overwhelming powers south into the North Atlantic, threatening to sever the lifeline between North America and Europe. The arsenal it has assembled is the stuff of nightmares. Russia has deployed a formidable fleet of advanced aircraft at modernized Arctic air bases, including the Su-33 and MiG-29K fighter jets, as well as the strategic MiG-31BM interceptors. Its attack submarines, the quiet and deadly Yasin and Akula classes, prowl the depths armed with Caliber cruise missiles. And then there's the Zircon, a hypersonic missile that travels at 9 times the speed of sound, a weapon for which NATO currently has no defense. To guide these weapons, Russia has activated a network of all-seeing eyes, Resonance N over-the-horizon radar stations on islands like Novaya Zemlya, which can track even stealthy aircraft. This is all stitched together by powerful electronic warfare hubs that can jam GPS, communications, and radar across vast swaths of the Arctic, blinding any opponent before the first shot is even fired. Even after suffering heavy losses in Ukraine, these critical strategic assets, the submarine fleet, the long-range bombers, the missile forces, remain intact and pointed north. And what is Canada bringing to this fight? For decades, its response has been defined by ambitious policy papers and a reality of chronic underfunding, aging equipment, and a procurement system so broken it's become a national embarrassment. Experts warn that Canada's military is stuck in the 20th century. While Ottawa finally promised in June 2025 to meet the 2% NATO spending target, a closer look reveals a terrifying truth. Most of the crucial new capabilities, like modern surveillance aircraft and long-range defenses, won't be operational until the 2030s. This creates a decade of vulnerability, a window of opportunity for Russia to exploit the power imbalance. Canada's critical weakness is its effective blindness in the undersea domain. It has no meaningful way to track Russian submarines in the vast Arctic waters. Its new patrol ships are not true warships. They lack the anti-submarine firepower needed for a real fight. Its own submarine fleet is old, diesel-powered, and can't operate under the ice for long. It has no permanent military bases in the High North. It's not just a capability gap, it's a doctrinal one. Canada is preparing to police its sovereignty. Russia is preparing for total war. When one player is setting up for chess and the other is preparing for a back-alley brawl, the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation is almost a certainty. The inevitable clash. How the war begins. Forget a full-scale Russian invasion of Canada. That's not how this war will start. Such a move would trigger NATO's Article 5, guaranteeing a massive response from the United States, a war Moscow knows it can't survive. Instead, Russia's strategy will be far more insidious, designed to paralyze and humiliate Canada without ever crossing the line into a conventional war. This is the new battlefield of hybrid warfare, and it represents the most likely path to conflict. The opening shots will be silent, a series of crippling cyber attacks targeting the fragile power grids and communication networks that northern communities depend on, plunging vast regions into darkness and chaos. Undersea, covert submersibles will snip the few fiber optic cables connecting the North to the outside world, isolating it completely. This will be followed by a sophisticated disinformation campaign, spreading false narratives online to sow discord between Ottawa and indigenous communities, paralyzing any unified response. Then comes the checkmate move, coercive paralysis. Imagine a state-of-the-art Russian research vessel, or perhaps a supposedly civilian icebreaker, appearing unannounced deep within the Northwest Passage. It's not a warship, so sinking it would be an act of aggression, but allowing it to proceed makes a mockery of Canadian sovereignty. Russia's goal is to create an ambiguous crisis that places the entire burden of escalation onto Ottawa. If Canada does nothing, its authority in the Arctic evaporates. If it responds with force, it risks being painted as the aggressor, potentially creating rifts within the NATO alliance. It's a strategic trap from which there is no easy escape. But what if miscalculation leads to escalation? In the tense, crowded environment of the New North, an incident at sea, a collision between a Canadian patrol ship and a Russian submarine, or a dangerous intercept of a surveillance plane in the air could easily spiral out of control. This leads to the doomsday scenario, a wider war between Russia and NATO, sparked in Europe but immediately spreading to the Arctic. In this context, Canadian territory becomes a primary target. The first wave would be hypersonic, Zircon and Kinzhal missiles launched from submarines and bombers in the high Arctic which streak across the pole, aimed at crippling high-value targets. Airbases in Yellowknife and F-35 hangars would be obliterated. The new, yet-to-be-completed over-the-horizon radar sites in southern Ontario, designed to be NORAD's new eyes, would be vaporized, blinding North America to follow-on attacks. The war wouldn't be about conquering Canadian territory, but about using it as a backdoor to disable the continent's defenses and prevent the flow of troops and supplies to the European front. What was once unthinkable, a direct missile attack on the Canadian mainland, becomes the logical opening move in a global conflict. The long peace on the ice is over. From a shattered dream of cooperation to a full-blown military standoff, the Arctic has become the world's most dangerous new flashpoint. Russia's Arctic fortress is complete, its hypersonic weapons are ready, and its strategic sights are set on the vast, undefended Canadian North. Has Canada's chronic underinvestment and slow modernization created a window of vulnerability so wide that conflict is now inevitable? Is Ottawa sleepwalking into a confrontation it is destined to lose? The stakes are nothing less than Canadian sovereignty and the security of North America. Is this the beginning of the end for Canada's Arctic dream, or the dawn of a military nightmare? Tell us what you think below.